Welcome to qnawire.
Here we have a composite function, one function inside another, and the inside function is a quotient. So we're going to end up using the chain rule and the quotient rule as we work through finding this derivative. And I'm going to rewrite s of t as 1 plus sine of t over 1 plus cosine of t to the 1/2 power. That way I can use the power rule in differentiating. So let's go ahead and find the derivative. So we're going to find the derivative of the outside function first, the 1/2 power function. So we bring down the 1/2 and we raise our quotient to the negative 1/2 power. Now we're going to find the derivative of the inside, and we need to use the quotient rule. So we have the bottom, 1 plus cosine t, times the derivative of the top. The derivative of sine t is cosine t. Of course, the derivative of 1 is 0. Minus the top, 1 plus sine t, times the derivative of the bottom, and the derivative of 1 plus cosine t would be negative sine t. Over the bottom squared, so that's over 1 plus cosine t squared. Okay, now let's simplify. So when we have something to a 1/2 power, it means square root, but if we have it to a negative 1/2 power, the negative part means reciprocal. So what we could do is just find the reciprocal of this and write the square roots in there as well. So we have 1 over 2 times the square root of 1 plus cosine t on the top and 1 plus sine t on the bottom. And of course, we don't have to write the 1. That's not necessary. Okay, and then let's go ahead and simplify the numerator that we got from the quotient rule. We're going to distribute the cosine, and we're going to distribute the negative sign, as well as the negative in front of that. And that's going to give us cosine t plus cosine squared t plus sine t plus sine squared t. Got to be real careful with those negatives there. Make sure you don't overlook any of them. And that's over 1 plus cosine t quantity squared. Okay, now remember your trigonometric identities. Cosine squared t plus sine squared t is what? Do you remember? Cosine squared theta plus sine squared theta, or t or x or whatever you want to use in there, is 1. So we can replace that with a 1. So at this point we have the square root of 1 plus cosine t over 2 times the square root of 1 plus sine t times 1 plus cosine t plus sine t over 1 plus cosine t quantity squared. Now this answer is looking great, but then you notice that you have a 1 plus cosine t to the 1/2 power on the top, and you have a 1 plus cosine t to the second power on the bottom, and you realize that you want to combine those. So let's go back and let's write the one on the top that had a square root sign as 1 plus cosine t to the 1/2 power. Maybe we prematurely changed it to a square root sign. So 1 plus cosine t to the 1/2 power. Okay, so now what we want to do is subtract the powers. So we end up with the 1/2 power minus the second power is the negative 3/2 power. So we end up with 1 plus cosine t to the 3/2 power on the bottom. So let's go ahead and get some space to write that out. So this is what we saw in the last slide. So we're combining that term and this term by subtracting the powers, and we end up with 1 plus cosine t plus sine t over 2 times the square root of 1 plus sine t times 1 plus cosine t to the 3/2 power. And then we say to ourselves, well, this is inconsistent. We have one of them with a square root sign and one of them not with a square root sign. So we say that's okay. We can change that. So we have 1 plus cosine t plus sine t over 2 times the square root of 1 plus sine t times the square root of 1 plus cosine t cubed. And then we say to ourselves, well, we shouldn't keep something cubed inside a square root sign, so let's simplify that. So now we have 1 plus cosine t plus sine t over 2 times, and we factor out a 1 plus cosine t. And so we have the square root of 1 plus sine t times 1 plus cosine t. We could put them in the same square root sign, couldn't we? So if we do that, we'll call it done. So let's put these inside the same square root sign. We have the square root of 1 plus sine t times 1 plus cosine t. Now remember that you may not be required to do all these steps of simplifying. It kind of depends on your instructor's preferences, and there are not hard and fast rules about simplifying. So what I'm showing you is how to get it down to the point where it looks like the answer that they had in the book.